understand what he meant.
He turned to me for help, and I managed to persuade him to go further and look at the whole Keynesian mumbo-jumbo, the panacea.
Keith Joseph toured the country, translating monetarism into a political programme. The primary job of economics was no longer to create employment, he said. It was to reduce inflation.
After having failed to persuade the shadow cabinet to reconsider our economic policies, I warned them that I'd have to make a speech. Well, the speech was made. I remember that I said to Sam Britton, who looked at one of the drafts, this speech has been through 9 drafts. We're trying to get it right. And Alfred Sherman from the background said, yes, and I wrote 13 of them. Well, we slogged at that speech.
Is threatening to destroy our society. The distress and unemployment that will follow unless the trend is stopped will be catastrophic. Inflation is caused by spending more than we produce, too much money, chasing too few goods, deficit financing, printing money. Mild inflation seemed a painless way of maintaining full employment, encouraging growth, and expanding the social services. We now see that inflation has turned out to be a mortal threat to all three.
But Labour was in power. As before, they had inherited the chaos of a Conservative boom. Yet this time, none of the traditional Keynesian methods offered them any help, because inflation and unemployment were rising together. It was something the Keynesians believed impossible. By the end of 1975, the economists advising the government were lost.
My memory is, I think it was a dinner party, deliberately organised, where the main economic modellers were there. The Treasury was represented, the Bank was represented, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, London Business School. I was a fly on the wall, and they were talking about the medium-term projections and their models. And they were unanimous that they could not project what was going to happen to inflation or to unemployment or the balance of payments. There was almost total agreement around the room that the UK was in serious danger of going into absolute decline, that was negative growth, not just growing at a slower rate than other industrialised countries. That is when the civil servants in the Treasury and the Bank of England realised that the UK economy had arrived at the brink of the abyss. They had sight of the awfulness of what that abyss might look like, and they were shell-shocked as a result of it.
Believe me, Lord, we've tried so hard. We've tried everything. Everything.
Then, in March 1976, Britain fell into the abyss.
2030, 2020, change it! Change! 2025!
Foreign investors, led by American bankers, panicked. The pound began to slide against the dollar, and nothing would stop it.
Sorry?
It's lost 2025 and it's stopping.
10.25, stock it.
It dropped 100 points. We don't know why. It just dropped 100 points when everything else was staying steady.
Britain faced bankruptcy. In desperation, Labour turned to the International Monetary Fund for a loan. An IMF team came to London. They were determined that the only way to restore confidence was for the British government to adopt monetarist policies. In a speech that could have been written by Keith Joseph, Prime Minister James Callaghan told the Labour Party why it had to do what the financial markets wanted.
We used to think that you could spend your way out of a recession and increase employment by cutting taxes and boosting government spending. I tell you in all candour that that option no longer exists, and that insofar as it ever did exist, it only worked on each occasion since the war by injecting a bigger dose of inflation into the economy on every occasion, followed by a higher level of unemployment as the next step.
It was presented scientifically, but then they're always presented scientifically as being the only way of doing it. There is no alternative. And this gripped people, but at the same time you must never forget that politics is in the pursuit of an interest, and an ideology, and if the scientist helps you with the ideology, you use him. If he doesn't, you disregard him. So the conflict between, as it were, Milton Friedman and Keynes was a political conflict. It wasn't really that it was people solemnly assessing the different values of two sets of ideas. One benefited one group, another benefited another.
In December 1976, the IMF granted a loan to Britain. That same month, Milton Friedman was awarded the Nobel Prize. In just 5 years, his economic theory had moved from the margins to centre stage. It was seen by many politicians as the only solution to Britain's disastrous economic position. And waiting in the wings was Friedman's most devoted follower, a politician who believed it was possible to use monetarism as the basis of a plan to regenerate the country. Keith Joseph was now the closest advisor to the new leader of the Tory party, Margaret Thatcher. He and the economists around him had drawn up what was called the medium-term financial strategy.
The boss.
Coffee, and then they want us all out. Angus, hello, in you go. Any particular? I'll bring you all out in a moment.
The plan was to combine monetarism with another theory from economics called rational expectations. It said that whenever a government changes policy, it will only work if the politicians can persuade people they are going to stick with it, whatever happens.
We believed that in announcing and publishing a mid-term financial strategy of what we were going to do with the crucial element of the money supply, we would persuade the negotiators, the managements and the trade unions, and the opinion formers that there must be some limit to pay claims if jobs were not to be priced out of the market. Rational expectation.
It was to get away from short-termism. And in that respect, it had something in common with the national plan, a comparison of which I'm not ashamed.
And as with the national plan, it was all very simple. The supply of money was to be reduced by raising interest rates and cutting public spending. Inflation would fall and enterprise flourish. Instead of putting money in, as Labour had done 15 years before, this time the theory said it should be tightly controlled.
We are gathered here to discuss phase one of the operation. Now, I don't have to tell you that as a general rule, banks take very good care of people's money. They are not going to give it to us, so we shall have to take it.
Monetarism worked throughout the 19th century, when we were the envy of the world, with our people growing in numbers and generally prospering, despite all the horrors of the time, generally prospering, with the world looking to us for how to do it. It could work again. There arose a slightly messianic sense of mission.
Haven't you heard of inflation?
Tell you what I don't want to see.
What's that?
Labour in power again.
Labour in power? Was that the Marx Brothers?
No, another bunch of comedians.
Coming shortly, the Conservatives.
I can't bear Britain in decline. I just can't. We who either defeated or rescued half Europe, who kept half Europe free, when otherwise it would be in chains. And look at us now.
The Thatcher government is a kind of an experiment in whether it will be possible in a democratic society that has gone as far as Britain has gone to change course in an orderly, effective way to set Britain on a new road. If the Thatcher government succeeds, it will be an example that will not be lost on the United States or the rest of the world.
The latest unemployed from the Royal Stafford helped form an unwelcoming committee for Mrs. Thatcher as she arrived at the
But the economy did not behave in the way the monetarists predicted. The squeeze on money led to a wave of factory closures, while inflation continued to rise.
Wasn't it? Which factories closed?
A small one, which suffered from lack of investment, among other things. I've been in insolvency for all my professional life, and I think up until 1980, I used to go in with a great deal of confidence that with new management and perhaps some sort of reorganisation, something could be done. It was very sad to have to go onto the shop floor in the early 80s into a company knowing, in fact, that there wasn't much chance of